Now, an Emeritus Newsbrief, I'm Lynn, Huston. The Labor Department says job losses last week were a lot more than expected. The department says 626,000 first-time jobless claims were filed. That's about 43,000 more than was expected. The number of those receiving unemployment benefits is nearing 4.8 million people, with more layoffs on the way as more companies reveal their poor fourth quarter and full year 2008 earnings. Today, Canadian plane maker Bombardier announced it was laying off 1,350 workers, some of them at a Kansas plant. More on the Emeritus News employment page. Meanwhile, the Senate has been arguing over various amendments to the economic stimulus bill. Republicans arguing that Democrats are clueless about the true cost and that it doesn't do enough for some homeowners. Democrats are saying Republicans are in denial about how bad the economy has become even since the first of the year and what it'll take to help homeowners and the jobless. Senators worked late into the night to pare down the cost of the stimulus. In the meantime, there are calls to deal just with the unemployment extensions and health insurance for the jobless, leaving most of the rest of the issues for more debate. A congressional oversight panel says the bank assets that the government bought last fall as the first part of the TARP bailout are now worth $78 billion less than was paid for.
What the group did was that they valued it three different ways. They took the primary ways that are thought by anyone to be appropriate ways to value assets, this kind of asset, and they valued it three different ways, and the three different ways converged, which gives us a very high confidence that the valuation we're using is on target.
Investigators believe the government bought them over market value to begin with. More on the Emeritus News business page. Confirmation for Labor Secretary-designate Congresswoman Hilda Solis is being held up. There are questions over more than $6,400 in tax liens against her husband's business, which were paid off. But the White House says Solis herself is clear on any tax issues. The list of those potentially scammed in the Madoff Ponzi scheme emerged from a bankruptcy court. You can see a copy on the Emeritus News Financial Pensions page. Reported on the list, talk show host Larry King, actor John Malkovich, and former baseball player Sandy Koufax. An Associated Press report is showing that more Army personnel died from suicides in January than were killed in combat in both Iran and Afghanistan. January's suicide total was 24. The total from Iran and Afghanistan was 16. It's also the highest suicide total for January in 4 years. More on the Emeritus News healthcare page. During a congressional hearing, the Assistant Surgeon General admitted what the rest of the country has known for weeks, that the FDA was too slow when it came to dealing with a salmonella outbreak linked to peanut butter. It took 5 months to recall the product after the first reports came back in September. The agency has been slow to trace the items made from the tainted product.
And has it started to gain momentum, and in this case, we actually were able to add it to a second cluster, and when those two clusters came together, it became very clear that this was a nationwide multi-state outbreak, and that triggered the full press with all the state epidemiologists saying, what's going on, let's start interviews, let's do some hypothesis generating, and then it takes about a month to sort of figure out what's going on.
When you take all of this in concert together, there is a huge breakdown in the system here. And I don't know whether there's stovepipes at CDC and FDA and the Georgia Department of Agriculture or what's going on here, but there is a total lack of information sharing between all of our food safety organizations that we simply have got to fix. And I'm not blaming you guys, because y'all, you're the messengers here, but it's pretty obvious that we got to make some major changes, and we can't do it without significant input from you folks.
A House hearing on the same issue is scheduled on the 11th. More on that story on the Emeritus News consumer page. The FDIC says banks are not doing enough for low-income people who don't have a bank account. The agency says banks need to do a better job reaching out to educate and serve low-income Americans. More on the Emeritus News business page. Emeritus News, the latest on the biggest issues in public policy at emeritusnews.com. That's an Emeritus News brief. I'm Lynn, Huston.